I paid their mortgage for 5 years, yet at Thanksgiving, Mom called me a burden while praising my unemployed brother. I silently walked out and canceled every payment. When Dad called asking about the bills, I told him to ask his pride and joy to handle it. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the dining room wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and tasted faintly of burnt sage and overcooked turkey. My hands were trembling beneath the table, hidden in the folds of the linen napkin I had bought for this specific occasion just 3 days ago. I stared at the centerpiece, a sprawling arrangement of autumn leaves and gourds that I had arranged myself because my mother, Susan, had said she was too overwhelmed to handle the decorations this year. "I'm just saying," my brother Andrew said, leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine in his hand, a vintage Cabernet I had brought from my personal collection. He swirled the red liquid, looking at the light catching in the crystal. "The market is volatile, sure, but that's where the real visionaries make their mark. You wouldn't understand, Margaret. Corporate logistics is, well, it's a bit pedestrian, isn't it? It's basically just moving boxes from point A to point B." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, that cold knot of anxiety that always formed whenever I walked through the door of my childhood home. I took a slow breath, trying to regulate my heart rate. "Supply chain management is a little more complex than moving boxes, Andrew," I said, keeping my voice level, though it took effort. "It's about global infrastructure, forecasting, and risk mitigation. It's the reason store shelves aren't empty." Andrew scoffed, a wet, dismissive sound. He looked at our mother, Susan, and our father, Arthur, seeking his usual audience. "See? She thinks she's saving the world because she tracks shipping containers. Meanwhile, I'm on the verge of closing a seed round for an app that will revolutionize peer-to-peer lending. Revolutionize it." I looked at my father, Arthur. He was staring at his mashed potatoes, pushing a lump of butter around with his fork, refusing to meet my eyes. He had been doing that a lot lately, shrinking into himself, letting the dynamic at the table roll over him like a tide he was too tired to fight. "Andrew," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice, "you've been closing a seed round for 3 years. Last month you asked me for gas money. If this revolution is happening, when exactly does it start paying the bills?" The room went dead silent. The clink of silverware stopped. Susan slammed her hand down on the table. The wine glasses rattled. Her face, usually composed in a mask of suburban pleasantry, twisted into a sudden, vicious scowl. She turned her eyes on me, and they were cold, colder than the wind rattling the window panes outside. "Enough, Margaret," she snapped. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Why must you always be so negative? Why must you always tear him down?" "I'm not tearing him down, Mom," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm asking a realistic question. You guys keep talking about his success, but I'm the one who—" "You're the one who what?" Susan interrupted, leaning forward. "You're the one who complains. You're the one who brings this toxic energy into my house every single holiday. You sit there with your expensive suit and your judgmental stare, looking down your nose at your brother." "I don't look down on him," I whispered, though I knew it was useless. "I just want him to be honest." "Honest?" Susan laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Here's some honesty for you, Margaret. You are exhausting. You come here, you pick at the food, you critique the atmosphere, and you act like a martyr. Honestly, you're just a burden, you always have been. Even when you were little, you were just heavy, hard work, unlike Andrew." The words hung in the air, vibrating. "You're just a burden." I felt like I had been slapped. My mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I looked at Arthur, desperate for him to intervene, to say, "Now, Susan, that's not fair. Margaret does so much for us." But Arthur just took a sip of water, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Andrew chuckled. It was a low, smug sound. He took a bite of turkey, chewed slowly, and then grinned at me. "Don't take it so hard, sis. Truth hurts. But hey, at least I make this family proud. At least I have a dream." I looked at Andrew's smirk. I looked at Susan's hate-filled glare. I looked at Arthur's cowardice. The betrayal wasn't just in the insult, it was in the erasure. It was the complete, total rewriting of reality that had just happened right in front of me. They weren't just mean. They were delusional, and in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it solidified. It turned into something hard and cold, like steel tempered in ice. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't flip the table. I simply put down my fork. It made a soft clink against the china plate. I stood up. The chair legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh screech that made Arthur flinch. I picked up my purse from the floor. "Margaret, sit down," Susan commanded, her voice wavering slightly as if she realized she might have gone a step too far, but was too proud to backtrack. "We haven't had dessert." I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I turned my back on the people who had just confirmed exactly what I was to them, a wallet they resented. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold November night. As the door clicked shut behind me, muting the sounds of the house, I realized that the pain I felt wasn't grief. It was the severing of a limb that had been gangrenous for years. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was the realization that I had been keeping them alive, and they hated me for it. The walk to my car felt surreal. The air was biting, stinging my cheeks, but I welcomed the sensation because it felt real, unlike the farce I had just participated in. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water, but I forced one foot in front of the other until I reached the driver's side door of my sedan. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. The leather was freezing against my palms. I stared at the house, the two-story colonial with the wreath on the door and the warm, yellow light spilling from the dining room window. From out here, it looked picture-perfect. It looked like the kind of home where a loving family was sharing a meal, laughing, and being grateful for one another. Inside, I knew the truth. They were probably already rationalizing my departure. Susan was likely pouring another glass of wine, telling Andrew, "She's just so sensitive, so dramatic. Don't let her ruin your night, sweetheart." Arthur was probably nodding, relieved the conflict was over so he could eat his pie in peace. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up, casting a soft blue glow over my hands. My phone, resting in the cup holder, buzzed. A text from Susan: "You are being incredibly childish. Come back inside and apologize to your brother, and we can move past this." I stared at the screen. Apologize. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. Then a text from Andrew: "Lol, drama queen much." I didn't reply. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my tires sounding like bones breaking. As I shifted into drive and pulled away, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror, a strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't just anger. It was a terrifying clarity. They genuinely didn't know. They lived in a bubble of reality that I had carefully constructed for them, a bubble reinforced by automated transfers and silent sacrifices. They believed their comfortable life, their paid bills, their groceries, and their maintenance repairs were just natural occurrences, like gravity or weather. They thought they were maintaining their lifestyle on Arthur's meager social security and Susan's non-existent income. I drove onto the highway, the streetlights blurring into streaks of orange and white. Tears finally started to prick at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. I let them fall. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her mother to look at her the way she looked at Andrew. I cried for the thousands of hours I had worked overtime, missing dates, missing vacations, missing sleep, just so I could make sure they never felt the pinch of poverty. I remembered the day 5 years ago when Dad sat me down, his face gray and ashen, telling me the pension fund had collapsed. He was going to lose the house. I had stepped in without hesitation. "I'll handle it, Dad. Don't worry, I'll fix it." And I had. I fixed it so well that they forgot it was ever broken. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing my makeup. The sadness was slowly being replaced by that cold, hard resolve again. I thought about Susan's voice. You're just a burden." I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 8:45 p.m. I thought about the banking app on my phone. I thought about the parents' expenses, sub-account I had created to keep things organized. I thought about the recurring transfer set for the first of every month, $2, $400 for the mortgage, plus the utilities, plus the insurance. They thought I was the burden. They thought I was the heavy weight dragging them down, spoiling their fun, dampening their joy with my pragmatism. A dark, humorless smile touched my lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who knows where the bodies are buried because she dug the graves. They had forgotten one crucial thing. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing keeping the roof over your head. To understand why that Thanksgiving dinner was the final straw, you have to understand the architecture of my family's dysfunction. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was built, brick by brick, over 3 decades. I was always the responsible one. The easy child. I got good grades, I didn't sneak out, I got a scholarship to college so they wouldn't have to pay. I did everything right because I thought that was the currency of love. I thought if I was perfect enough, low maintenance enough, eventually, Susan would look at me with that softness she reserved for Andrew. Andrew was different. Andrew was the dreamer. He was 4 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, he was the center of Susan's universe. He was charismatic, I'll give him that. He had a way of smiling that made you want to believe whatever nonsense was coming out of his mouth. But beneath the charm, there was a rot, a selfishness that Susan nurtured like a rare orchid. When Andrew failed out of his first college, it was the professor's fault. When he got fired from his first job for stealing from the register, it was a misunderstanding. When he crashed Dad's car, it was bad road conditions, even though it was a sunny July afternoon. And then came the financial crash. 5 years ago, Arthur, my father, was forced into early retirement. His pension, which was supposed to be their safety net, was decimated due to company mismanagement. They were facing foreclosure within months. I was 27, just starting to make real money in my career. I sat them down at that same dining room table. I looked at their terrified faces. "I will take over the mortgage," I had told them. "I'll pay the property tax, I'll cover the utilities. You guys just cover groceries and your personal spending. I'll take care of the house." Arthur had cried. He had held my hand and promised he would pay me back. Susan had sighed in relief and said, "Thank God one of us is in a position to help." One of us, not thank you, Margaret, just a general acknowledgement that the universe had provided. Over the years, the arrangement shifted. Arthur stopped mentioning paying me back. Susan started treating the payments as an entitlement. And Andrew became the parasite that fed on the comfort I provided. Because I was paying the bills, Susan and Arthur had disposable income from Social Security. And where did that money go? To Andrew. Andrew, who wore designer sneakers while I shopped at outlets. Andrew, who drove a leased BMW that Dad co-signed for while I drove a 6-year-old Honda. Andrew, the primary antagonist in my life, though he pretended to be my best friend when he needed cash. He was a serial entrepreneur, which is code for unemployed with a vibrant imagination. He had founded a clothing line, failed, a crypto consultancy, scam, and now this peer-to-peer lending app. He had never held a W-2 job for longer than 6 months. The week before Thanksgiving, I had stopped by the house to drop off some groceries, another expense I absorbed. I found Andrew in the living room, feet up on the coffee table, watching TV in the middle of a Tuesday. "Hey, sis," he had said, not looking up. "Mom says you're bringing the wine for Thanksgiving. Make sure it's not that cheap stuff you brought last year. I'm trying to impress a date." "I didn't bring cheap wine last year, Andrew. It was a $40 bottle," I had replied, putting the bags down. "And maybe if you want specific wine, you could buy it." He finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He had this look, slick, polished, but empty. He was handsome in a conventional way, but his face was starting to show the bloat of alcohol and laziness. "Why are you always counting pennies? You make, what, 6 figures? Don't be stingy, it's ugly." "It's not about being stingy, it's about respect," I said. "Relax," he waved a hand dismissively. "When this app launches, I'll buy you a vineyard, then you can stop complaining." He didn't know I paid the mortgage. That was the secret Arthur and I kept. Arthur was too ashamed to admit his daughter was supporting him, and Susan? Well, Susan just didn't want to know the details. She preferred the fantasy that they were doing fine and Andrew was just finding his footing. But Andrew's comment at Thanksgiving, "At least I make this family proud," revealed the depth of the poison. He genuinely believed that his potential was worth more than my reality. He believed his non-existent millions were more valuable than the actual checks I wrote every month. And Susan agreed. She looked at his smoke and mirrors and saw a castle. She looked at my foundation and saw a shackle. They saw my stability as boring. They saw my reliability as servie. Dude. As I drove into my apartment complex, the rage finally settled into a cold, strategic plan. I wasn't just a daughter they had insulted. I was the chief financial officer of their lives, and the CFO had just resigned. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my heels, and went straight to my laptop. I opened it, the screen glowing in the darkroom. I logged into my bank. There it was, the scheduled transfer for December 1st, $2,400. Title: Mom and Dad Mortgage. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. I hesitated for exactly 1 second. I thought about Arthur's sad eyes. But then I heard Susan's voice again. "You're just a burden." If I was a burden, then it was my moral duty to remove myself. I was simply granting their wish. I clicked Cancel Series. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer?" "Yes," I said out loud to the empty room. "I'm sure." I clicked Confirm. Then I went to the utility companies. Electric, gas, water, internet. All of them were in Arthur's name, but attached to my credit card for auto pay. Remove card, remove card, remove card. I worked with the precision of a surgeon. I didn't leave a single financial thread connecting me to that house. By the time I closed my laptop, it was midnight. I had effectively severed the artery that kept their household running. Now, all I had to do was wait. The first week of silence was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. Usually, my phone was a constant stream of micro-emergencies from my mother. "The internet is slow, did you pay the bill?" Or, "Your father's prescription copay went up, can you transfer $50? Or, "Andrew needs a suit for an interview, put it on your card, he'll pay you back." But since walking out on Thanksgiving, my phone had been blissfully, terrifyingly quiet. They were punishing me. That was their tactic, the silent treatment. It was designed to make me panic, to make me crave their approval so badly that I would come crawling back with an apology and a checkbook. They didn't realize that in the supply chain world, silence isn't a punishment. It's a sign that the system is down, and I wasn't the one who needed the system running. I went to work. I sat in my corner office with the view of the city skyline, handling logistics for shipments moving from Shanghai to Los Angeles. I was efficient. I was calm. But beneath the surface, I was shifting from a daughter into a forensic accountant. If I was going to cut them off, I needed to know exactly what I was up against when the inevitable explosion occurred. I needed to know just how deep Andrew's delusions went. I started with the company he had bragged about at dinner, Lensphere. I pulled up the state business registry database. I typed in the name. No results found. I tried variations. Lensphere, Lensphere LLC, Sphere Lending. Nothing. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, swirling my coffee. Interesting, I muttered. If he was closing a seed round, there had to be an entity to invest in. You don't write a venture capital check to Andrew's personal checking account. I broadened my search. I went to LinkedIn. I found his profile. It was polished, filled with buzzwords. CEO and founder at Lensphere, disrupting the fintech space. Visionary. I looked at his employees. There were two. One was a guy I recognized from his high school stoner days, listed as Chief Marketing Officer. The other was a stock photo of a woman that appeared on 20 different scam websites when I did a reverse image search. I decided to call in a favor. I have a friend, David, who works in venture capital due diligence. We grabbed lunch on a Wednesday, a week and a half after Thanksgiving. Lensphere, David laughed, wiping mustard off his lip. Margaret, I've never heard of it, and if they were raising a seed round in the city, I would know. The circles are small. Who is the lead investor? He didn't say, I replied, cutting my salad with precise, angry strokes. Look, David said, his voice dropping. I ran a quick background check on your brother, just the basics, since you asked. Margaret, he's not raising money, he's being chased by it. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He has 3 judgments against him in small claims court from his last venture. Unpaid vendors. And his credit score? It's sub 500. No reputable VC is touching him with a 10-foot pole. If he's getting money, it's not from investors, it's from informal sources or family. I nodded slowly. Family, I whispered. The picture was becoming clear. There was no revolution. There was no app. There was just a 29-year-old man playing dress-up as a CEO, burning through cash to maintain the illusion, likely siphoning whatever liquid cash my parents had left while I covered the hard costs of the house. I went home that night and created a spreadsheet. I listed every lie Andrew had told in the last 5 years and cross-referenced it with withdrawals I could see on my parents' old bank statements. Accounts I used to have access to before they changed the passwords a year ago for privacy. I still had the downloaded PDFs. August 2022, $5,000 withdrawal. Andrew claims he needs server space. Real cost of server space for a non-existent app, $0. December 2023, $3,000 withdrawal. Andrew claims legal fees for patenting. USPTO search for his name, 0 results. He wasn't just a failure, he was a fraud, and he was bleeding them dry while I was keeping them warm. I saved the file as the audit, XLSX. I was ready. I just had to wait for the first domino to fall. It happened on December 18th. I was in a meeting regarding a port strike in Rotterdam when my phone buzzed. It was Arthur. I ignored it. It buzzed again immediately, then a third time. I excused myself from the meeting, stepping out into the quiet hallway. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed gray winter clouds gathering over the city. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and swiped green. Hello, Dad, I said. My voice was cool, professional. Margaret, Arthur's voice was high, tight with panic. There was none of the usual passive mumbling. He sounded like a man standing on a ledge. Margaret, thank God, I've been trying to reach you. Is your phone broken? My phone is working fine, Dad. I've been busy. Working. You know, that thing that makes me a burden. He ignored the jab, too frantic to process it. Margaret, listen, there's been a mistake, a terrible mistake. I got a letter today from the bank, and then I checked the online portal for the mortgage. He paused, breathing heavily. It says the payment for December wasn't made. It says we're past due, and there's a late fee. Yes, I said, that sounds correct. Correct, he sputtered. What do you mean correct? You handle the mortgage. You've handled it for years. Did you forget? Did something happen with your account? You need to fix this right now, Margaret. They sent a red notice. I didn't forget, Dad, I said, picking at a piece of lint on my blazer. And nothing is wrong with my account. I canceled the payment. The silence on the other end was absolute. It lasted for 10 seconds. You what? I canceled it, I repeated, enunciating clearly. And the utilities, and the insurance. I removed my card from everything. But why? He sounded genuinely baffled, like a child who couldn't understand why the sun had gone out. Margaret, you know we don't have that kind of money coming in. You promised. I promised to help a family that treated me with respect, I said, my voice hardening. But at Thanksgiving, Mom made it very clear. She said I was a burden. She said I've always been a burden. So I decided to relieve you of that burden. I removed myself and my money from your life. You're free. That was just talk, Arthur cried. She was stressed. It was Thanksgiving. It was the truth, Dad. She said what she really thinks. And you sat there. You sat there and ate your potatoes while Andrew laughed at me. Give me the phone. I heard scuffling, and then Susan's voice blasted into my ear. She wasn't panicking, she was furious. Margaret, she shrieked. What is this game you are playing? Do you have any idea what you've done? We have a late fee. It's on our credit report. Hello, Mother, I said. Don't you hello, Mother me? Fix this immediately. Log in right now and pay it. And pay the late fee. I will not have my credit ruined because you are having a tantrum. It's not a tantrum, I said calmly. It's a resignation. You are being cruel, she shouted. You are trying to hurt us. You are trying to hurt your brother. He is on the verge of a breakthrough, and you're trying to destabilize the house to ruin his focus. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. It was a dark, hollow sound that echoed in the empty hallway. His focus? Mom, Andrew is unemployed. He's not a visionary, he's a leech. How dare you? The mortgage is $2,400, I said, cutting over her. If Andrew is so successful, if he makes this family so proud, surely he can write a check. He's the golden child, right? He's the investment genius. His money is tied up in equity, Susan stammered, falling back on the lies Andrew had fed her. He can't liquidate right now. Then he better find a way to liquidate, I said. Because I'm done. I am not paying another cent. You called me a burden. Burdens don't pay mortgages. Burdens don't keep the lights on. Margaret, please, Arthur's voice came back on, sounding broken. We don't have it, the pension. You know we don't have it. I know, I said, and for a second my heart ached. But then I remembered Andrew's smirk. So, I suggest you ask your pride and joy, ask Andrew to step up. It's his turn. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally letting the wall fall. The fallout was immediate and messy. Over the next week, the flying monkeys arrived. My Aunt Linda called me, leaving a voicemail saying I was elder abusing my parents by stealing their housing security. I texted her a screenshot of my bank statements showing $140,000 in payments over 5 years with the caption, I didn't steal security, I bought it. Now they have to pay their own rent. She didn't reply. My cousin called to say I was being petty. But I stayed focused on the investigation. Now that the gloves were off, I needed the nuclear option. I knew that eventually, Susan and Arthur would realize Andrew couldn't pay. I needed to show them why he couldn't pay and where their own money had gone. I hired a private investigator named Reynolds. He was expensive, but I had plenty of disposable income now that I wasn't funding a 3-adult household. I need to know where Andrew's money goes, I told Reynolds. Not the business stuff, I know that's fake. I need to know his daily spend. Reynolds came back 3 days before Christmas with a thick manila envelope. We met in a diner. It's not pretty, Reynolds said, sliding the photos across the table. I flipped through them. Andrew at a casino. Andrew at a high-end sports bar. Andrew handing cash to a guy who looked like he broke thumbs for a living. He's a gambler, I asked. Sports betting, Reynolds corrected. And he's bad at it, really bad. But that's not the worst part. Look at the last document. I pulled out a photocopy of a loan agreement. It was a high-interest, predatory personal loan for $20,000. It was co-signed. I looked at the signature at the bottom, Arthur Miller. My blood ran cold. Dad signed this. Reynolds shook his head. Look closer at the handwriting. I squinted. The A in Arthur was looped. My father's handwriting was spiky, jagged. This loop, I had seen it on a million birthday cards. It was Andrew's handwriting. He had forged Dad's signature, to get a loan to cover his gambling debts. He committed fraud against his own father, I whispered. And, Reynolds added, I found his office. He's been paying rent on a co-working space downtown just to have a place to go during the day so your parents think he's working. He spends 6 hours a day there playing video games on his laptop. I felt a mixture of nausea and vindication. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Meanwhile at the house, things were unraveling. I knew this because Arthur called me on Christmas Eve. He sounded different this time. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded exhausted, defeated. The electricity is off, he said simply. They cut it this morning. We're using candles. Andrew didn't pay it, I asked. Andrew said there was a banking error. He said he sent the wire, but the bank froze it because it was too large. Dad, I said softly, there is no wire, there is no bank account. Your mother believes him, Arthur said, his voice cracking. She's in the kitchen right now, heating soup on the camping stove, telling me how the bank is persecuting Andrew because he's too successful. She won't listen to me, Margaret. I tried to tell her. I checked my own savings account, the emergency fund. It's gone. $5,000. Gone. Andrew took it. He said he borrowed it for a liquidity bridge. He said he'd put it back double by New Year's. Arthur began to weep. It was a horrible, jagged sound. I'm cold, Margaret. It's Christmas Eve and I'm cold. I know, Dad, I said. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I refused to cave. If I went over there and paid the bill now, nothing would change. The cycle would reset. I had to let them hit rock bottom. I have something I need to show you, but I'm not coming to the house. I won't come inside that house. Where? He asked. Come to my office on the 26th. Bring Mom. Tell Andrew he needs to come too. Tell him I'm ready to negotiate the payments. You'll pay? Arthur asked, hope flooding his voice. I said I'm ready to negotiate, but everyone has to be there. I hung up. I looked at the file Reynolds had given me. The audit, XLSX, had evolved into a criminal dossier. I wasn't going to save them. I was going to perform an exorcism. The conference room in my office building was sterile and imposing, glass walls, a long mahogany table, and a view of the city that looked cold and gray in the post-Christmas slump. I sat at the head of the table, the file Reynolds had given me sitting closed in front of me like a loaded weapon. They arrived at 10:00 a.m. sharp. Arthur looked 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving. He was wearing a heavy coat that looked slightly rumpled, likely because he was sleeping in it to stay warm in the unheated house. Susan looked frantic, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes darting around the luxurious office with a mix of awe and resentment. And Andrew strode in wearing a suit. That was too shiny, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew was empty. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he still had that arrogant tilt to his chin. Well, Andrew said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting to be asked. Nice setup. A bit corporate for my taste, lacks creative energy, but it pays the bills, I guess. Susan sat next to him, reaching out to pat his arm. It's very efficient, Margaret, she said, her tone dripping with implied criticism. So, are we here to resolve this nonsense? Your father has caught a cold because of your little stunt with the heating. My stunt? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't turn off the heat, Mom. The power company did, because the bill wasn't paid. I assumed Andrew, with his impending millions, would have handled a $200 electric bill. I told you, Andrew said quickly, waving a hand. My assets are illiquid right now. The wire transfer triggered a fraud alert because it was so large. It takes 7-10 business days to clear compliance. You know how banks are. Actually, I said, opening the file folder, I do know how banks are, and I know that's not how they work. We're not here for a lecture, Susan snapped. You said you wanted to negotiate. Here is the negotiation. You turn the auto pay back on, you pay the back-owed mortgage, and you apologize to your brother for embarrassing him. In exchange, we will forgive you for ruining Christmas. Arthur looked at me, his eyes pleading. Margaret, please, can we just fix it? I am going to fix it, I said, but not the way you think. I slid the first piece of paper across the table toward Arthur. It was the forged loan document. What is this? Arthur squinted at it. That is a $20,000 personal loan taken out in your name 3 months ago, I said. Look at the signature. Arthur looked, he frowned, he looked at Andrew. Andrew handled the paperwork for me, Arthur said, his voice shaking. He said it was. He said it was for refinancing the car to get a lower rate. It wasn't for the car, Dad, I said. It was a high-interest cash loan. The money was deposited into Andrew's account, and look where it went. I slid the photos across the table. Andrew at the casino, Andrew handing cash to the bookie. Andrew stood up, his face flushing red. This is an invasion of privacy. You hired a pie? You're psychotic, Margaret. Sit down, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. It was the voice I used to command logistical fleets. It carried weight. Andrew hesitated, then sat sullen. Susan was staring at the photos. He likes to play cards. So what? It's a hobby. You're trying to criminalize his hobbies. It's not a hobby when he's stealing from you to fund it, I said. I pulled out the bank records, the ones showing the emergency fund withdrawal. $5,000. Gone. He told you it was a liquidity bridge. It went to DraftKings and FanDuel. Look at the transaction codes. Susan picked up the paper. Her hands were trembling. She stared at the lines of data. And finally, I said, delivering the killing blow, Lensphere. I slid the state business registry search, null results, and the credit report across the table. There is no company, Mom. There is no seed round. There are no investors. Andrew is not an entrepreneur. He is unemployed. He has been unemployed for 3 years. He spends his days at a co-working space playing Call of Duty. I have the logs from their Wi-Fi network. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system, a luxury their house no longer had. Andrew looked at the table, his jaw working. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The paper trail was too thick. Susan looked at Andrew. For the first time in my life, I saw the veil lift. I saw her look at her golden child and see the tarnish. Andrew, she whispered, is this true, the investors? Andrew slammed his hand on the table. You don't understand. I'm building something. It takes time. Margaret is just jealous because she's a drone. She's a cog in the machine. I'm the cog that paid for the roof over your head, I shouted, finally letting my own anger break through. I'm the cog that paid for the food in your stomach. I paid the mortgage for 5 years, Andrew, me, while you played pretend. I turned to my parents. He has drained you. He stole your emergency fund. He forged Dad's signature. And when the heat went off, he let you freeze rather than admit he didn't have $200. Arthur stood up slowly. He looked at the loan document again. He looked at his son. You forged my name? Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. To gamble. I was going to win it back, Andrew yelled. I had a system. Arthur turned to Susan. He let us freeze, Susan. He let us freeze. Susan had her head in her hands. She was sobbing, not the angry, defensive sobbing she usually did. This was the broken, gasping sobbing of a woman realizing her entire worldview was a lie. You called me a burden, I said to Susan, my voice dropping to a whisper. But look at the table. Who is the burden? Susan looked up. Her eyes were red, rimmed with mascara. She looked at me, then at Andrew. Then she looked at Arthur. Arthur took a deep breath. He seemed to grow 2 inches taller. He looked at Andrew. Get out, Arthur said. What? Andrew scoffed. Dad, come on, don't be dramatic. I said get out, Arthur roared. It was a sound I had never heard him make. It was primal. You stole from me. You lied to us. You let your mother sit in the dark. Get out of this office. And do not come back to the house. Mom, Andrew turned to Susan. You're not going to let him do this. Susan wiped her face. She looked at Andrew with a look of profound disappointment. You said you made us proud, she whispered. You lied. She turned her head away. Andrew looked at them, then at me. He sneered. Fine, whatever, you're all holding me back anyway. He grabbed his empty briefcase and stormed out of the room. The door clicked shut. Arthur collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Susan reached out and took his hand. I sat there watching them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. But I also felt light. The truth was out. The infection had been exposed. The aftermath was painful, but necessary. Andrew tried to come back the next day, but Arthur had changed the locks, something I paid for, this time happily. When Andrew realized the bank of Mom and Dad was truly closed, he disappeared. We heard rumors he moved in with a friend 3 towns over, but without the constant influx of cash, his entrepreneurial lifestyle collapsed. Last I heard, he was working at a car rental agency near the airport. It's a start. For my parents, the reality check was brutal. They had to face their finances without the foggy lens of denial. I sat down with them again, not as a savior, but as a consultant. I will not pay the mortgage anymore, I told them firmly. I need to build my own life. You have Social Security. It's not enough for that big house. They sold the Colonial. It was hard for Susan to let go of the status of the big house, but the debts Andrew had racked up in Arthur's name needed to be paid. The sale of the house covered the mortgage. Paid off the fraudulent loan, Arthur decided not to press charges if Andrew stayed away, a mercy I didn't agree with but respected, and left them with enough to buy a small, 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community. It's a nice place, it's warm, and most importantly, it's within their budget. Our relationship is different. It's recovering, but the dynamic has shifted permanently. Susan doesn't criticize my career anymore. In fact, when she introduces me to her new neighbors at the condo, she says, "This is Margaret. She's a senior manager in logistics. She's very successful." She says it with a hint of fear, as if she knows I could walk away again at any moment. And she's right. I still visit, we have Sunday dinner. But now, I don't bring the wine and I don't pay for the groceries. I bring myself. Last Sunday, we were eating roast chicken in their small dining nook. The conversation was light. Arthur was talking about his new gardening club. Susan was talking about the neighbors. There was a moment of silence. "Margaret," Arthur said, putting down his fork. He looked at me, his eyes clear. "Thank you for everything you did before and for waking us up." Susan looked down at her plate, then at me. She didn't say the words. She's still Susan, after all, but she reached out and squeezed my hand. "The chicken is good, Mom," I said. "I'm glad you like it," she said softly. "I made it just for you." It wasn't a perfect ending. We aren't a TV family. But the parasite was gone, the house of lies had been demolished, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the burden. I was just the daughter, and that was enough.